I were to ask myself, what is the greatest test of humanity? It would be forgiveness. It would be accepting someone for their wrong and moving forward. Forgiving yourself. And the reason I ask this question is because, as a doctor, and I would call myself, I'm not a doctor yet, but as I move toward being a doctor, I, as a brown woman, have to ask myself, am I going to be able to forgive this patient? Am I going to be okay with who's on my table? My values may not match theirs. They may think I belong in a different country, whereas I feel I belong everywhere, universally. And see, the thing is, when you have somebody's life in your hand, there's rarely space for mistakes. Because then you have to say, are you going to be okay with that? Are you going to be okay with losing someone's life because you're angry with them, because you don't like their values? It's a careful balance between being selfish and being selfless. You have to be fully engaged to ask yourself this. Because if that's your mom and dad on the table, if that's somebody you loved on the table, you'd want that doctor to care a lot about every last detail. One slip up and their life is gone. One slip up and you're the reason somebody wants to kill themselves. One reason, just one thing that you do, could be so small and you would not even realize it. Every little action you make has to be deliberate. Every word, every choice, every piece of knowledge you share. Imagine you say something and it puts everybody in a mass panic. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but that knowledge is very, very precious. It's like this little seed. I can barely grab it. Maybe I'm not fully engaged. If these were blood veins, what would I do? I can't be inside somebody's body and start researching what's an artery vein. What's a blood vessel? I have to know it. It has to be ingrained in my head. What if this is a tumor right here? This little guy right here. What if this is a tumor? You think I can just snip that off? No. These are your blood vessels. And there's a clot. Maybe this is a clot inside your body. And I have to snip out the clot. I have to completely snip it without harming the circulatory system. Because this was created somewhere inside the circulatory system. There was an imbalance somewhere. I have to save the veins. Every last detail. And watching this, you might say, oh, she's insane. She's cutting a pumpkin and talking about the vascular system. She's talking about the circulatory system and how it interconnects with the respiratory system and how our oxygen is carried through each little tiny vessels like these strands and then moves into the heart, which is right here. And this heart pumps all the blood into different parts of the body. How do you think a pumpkin's made? Photosynthesis. Do we know what photosynthesis is? The sun had to hit this pumpkin. It started as a seed, just like this one. See this? How this strand connects from the pumpkin seed all the way to the rest of this giant organ right here. This seed was this pumpkin. Maybe you can't see it as well. Maybe you're not as microscopically looking. But right here, this was underground. Snip. Now, this same seed, could have been placed upside down and it would have grown not so well. So it's important to identify in this little cell of a pumpkin seed, this is the top of the cell. That's the bottom. It has to be planted with this part down and this part up. See that? So then when you get a little piece of strand like this, or this one, it grows up. And it creates more strands like this, and that's how the root system gets built. And imagine you have this big, giant clump of seeds in one area. All these little guys. And they're all underground, but they're spread out. And then all these roots connect together. And then you see the giant pumpkin patch. Everything's connected. The worms eat the bad molecules that are going to stop these seeds from growing. I am that worm right now. I'm taking this giant tumor out of my body. This is the body. I no longer welcome it. Removing my memory loss. I'm removing my disappointment. I'm removing my victimization. I'm removing my lack of love for myself. I'm removing the hate with each seed I take out of this. So, when we get to the photosynthesizing concept, multiple forms of energy create a giant pumpkin. The energy is called ATP. ATP is formed using NADPH and transfers of electrons. As electrons move and are carried from one atom to the next, there are different bonds and breaks happening. So, to put that into context, say you have 2 hydrogens and an oxygen, one of the simplest molecules, most abundant in the world. And it's polyionic, obviously, because there's 2 molecules, or I guess 2 atoms, not molecules, coming together, and then the 3rd oxygen comes along and they combine. But you see, hydrogen has 1 atom, 1 electron. For that 1 atom, there's 1 electron in hydrogen. Now you have 2 hydrogens combining. That's 2 electrons. But how did 2 negatives come together? How much energy did it take to bring them together? How much energy would it take to pull those 2 hydrogens apart? They're both electric. They're both negatives. Well, regardless, now you have an oxygen coming along, and the oxygen wants to join the party. The 2 hydrogens are fighting, and the oxygen says, let me cool you down. Well, they balance out because oxygen has 2 electrons. So now the 2 hydrogens say, well, you know what, why are we fighting with each other? Let's fight with the oxygen. 2 of us can fight 1 oxygen off, right? But the problem is the electrons don't need to be fighting in the first place. We just lost an atom. It's a weird way to think about it. But a form of energy had to take place to bring all those together. It takes energy to bring that together. It goes deeper than that. So NADPH, this transfer that's taking place to create energy Energy obviously comes from the sun. So the sun comes along and it gives it a bunch of light. So it'll see some light. And what takes place is it starts to heat up all those atoms inside of it. Those atoms start fighting and breaking apart or coming together and finding ones that treat it better, you know? Like these ones. This could be a polymer right here. This is a polymer. This single seed that's sitting here alone, monomer. But these polymers start to form and a bigger cell starts to form. And the cell gets bigger because, you know, that energy from the sun is breaking apart. And combining, and all these electrons are fighting each other until they start to split apart and build more and more and more. It's kind of like how businesses work. If you took one seed, one person with the idea, say you've got one seed right here. This one breaks apart from the group and starts to make more friends. So this one follows suit, makes more friends, and each one makes another clump like this. Until they're working in a polymer structure. But at the cellular level, it's called DNA. Interesting, right? It's the same cycle on repeat. Does that make sense? We start with DNAs. A, C, D, G. We have certain letters to describe certain DNAs. DNA aspects of the strand, the circular strand that's occurring. Then that spiral DNA is splitting and splitting and splitting until it has more cells because it has to grow. If you keep splitting and breaking things apart, eventually they grow a little bit bigger and bigger. Now, imagine if this right here is a tumor. If this is a tumor, and I start cutting it out of a place in the body, and I let it start to spill out here, if this cell structure of the tumor, let's say this is a cell. This is the nucleus, this is the ribosomes, and this is the membrane wall. Now, if this is a tumor, then this is the membrane wall, and inside is infected. Now, the thing to understand is, how did it get infected first of all? Why is something entering in here for this cancerous cell to form in the first place? What attacked the DNA? Something had to go inside the DNA structure, which is these slimy little guys. Something had to. So that the DNA inside of it starts to break and create these cells and these proteins and these yucky tumors that eat at the rest of the body and infect the whole pumpkin. You have to find out what's going on inside of that. Now, over here on this side of the wall, seems we have a mutation. Right there, that's our mutation. Now, that's physical. That's physically what we see. When we go in the inside of the body, now we have to ask ourselves, what happened at the cellular level for the physical level to look incorrect? We can use genome editing to fix it, but that's first we have to figure out what the root of the issue is. And this is our root system. So, in our root system, something from here to here went wrong. When the heart cell, the center cell of the pumpkin, right in the bottom of this, started growing, all that energy started forming roots that grew up and around. This root started out a seed that's connected to a vine. Similarly, when the cells are mutating and they begin to grow, if something goes wrong, this could potentially be an outside issue, environmental, or it could be genetic. Now, if it was genetic, there would be more scars here. It would be repeating physically, but it's not. Instead, it's just here, which could tell us it was something in the dirt. Maybe it was something, some sort of mold, maybe, versus down here, we can see physical dirt. We know that's dirt. We could test that. Now for this part, we'd want to remove in a sense the tissue that is infected. And we have to remember that when we have an unknown bacteria and we're getting a sample in our petri dish, we want to ensure that the infected knife doesn't contaminate the rest, because we don't know if it's contagious. We're going to take this to the lab.